Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second in a series of programs that Printed Matter has produced in advance of the upcoming Virtual Art Book Fair. PMVABF will be taking place February 24th through the 28th. My name is Sinel Breslov, and I'm the Director of Fairs and Editions at Printed Matter. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I would like to extend my deep appreciation to today's speakers, artist Carolina Caycedo, curator Carla Acevedo-Yates, editor and artist Lorena Mostajo, and community organizer and artist Gloria Galvez. A little over a year ago, as our team was gearing up for the 2020 LA Art Book Fair, we were introduced to Gloria Galvez through a close member of the Printed Matter community, Kimmy Hanauer. Gloria generously shared with us her experience and insight of an expanded community of LA-based artists, educators, and activists. This included Carolina Caycedo. We, in turn, invited Carolina to create a mural for the LA Art Book Fair 2020. Sadly, as we all know, the fair was canceled, and the mural, which illustrates a system of equity for workers and the environment, was left unrealized. Although I was told it is illustrated in the new publication, which will be discussed this evening and was produced on the occasion of Carolina's current exhibition at the MCA Chicago, curated by Carla. Tonight also joining is Lorena Mostajo of Taller, California, a San Diego, Tijuana region-based publisher, engaged with border community and a new exhibitor this year to Printed Matter Art Book Fairs. We are so very thrilled to bring this incredible group together today. This program feels like a year in the making and especially urgent following a year of pandemic and unrest. During the conversation, we encourage you all joining us this evening to put your questions in the Zoom chat box. If you are joining us through YouTube Live, please add your questions to the comments, and we will be sure to share them with the speakers towards the end of the program. We'll be adding a few links into the chat box, including a link to purchase Carolina's new publication and a link to her exhibition currently on view at the MCA Chicago. We'll also be offering a live captions for this program, and also dropping a link for viewers now. Please note this program will be recorded and available on Printed Matter's YouTube channel tomorrow. So once again, I would like to extend a special thank you to Gloria Galvez, who will be moderating this evening and introducing the speakers as well. Gloria is LA-based and maintains a practice committed to creating and expanding access to physical and abstract spaces of possibility, imagination, and self-determination, especially for individuals for whom it's constantly denied. She has organized with community organizations like the Youth Justice Coalition and Mutual Aid Action in Los Angeles. Galvez has exhibited at various alternative spaces as well as art, educational, and community-based places. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that kind intro, Sunal. And I am very happy to be here today in the presence of all of these powerful people doing important work. And I will start by introducing everybody who's here today a little bit more in depth so people can get a sense of who they are and what they have been doing. I will begin with who is a London-born Colombian artist living in Los Angeles. She participates in movements of territorial resistance, solidarity economies, and housing as a human right. Caycedo's artistic practice has a collective dimension in which performances, drawings, photographs, and videos are not just an end result, but rather part of the artist's process of research and acting. Her work contributes to the construction of environmental historical memory as a fundamental element for non-repetition of violence against human and non-human entities, and generates a debate about the future in relation to common goods, environmental justice, just energy transition, and cultural biodiversity. She held residencies at the Huntington Gardens, libraries, and art collections in San Marino, California. in DAAD Artist in Berlin program, amongst others. Caycedo has received funding from the Creative Capital California Community Foundation, Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs, Harpo Foundation, Art Matters, Colombian Culture Ministry, Arts Council UK, and Prince Claus Found. And recently, Caycedo has had solo museum shows held at the Museum Scutzi and Lodz, Orange County Museum of Art, and ICA Boston and MCA Chicago. In her 2019 Hearn work was a part of the 45 Salon Nacional de Artistas Colombia, Chicago Architecture Biennial Film Sector of the Art Basel in Basel. In the 2021 One Lost Artist in Residence at the Occidental College in Los Angeles. And on an ending note, Caycedo is a 2020/2022 inaugural Borderlands Fellow at the Center for Imagination in the Borderlands, Arizona State University, and the Vera List Center for Art and Politics. And she is a member of the Los Angeles Tenants Union and Rios Vivos Colombia social movement. Next, we have Carla Acevedo-Yates, who is the Marilyn and Larry Fields curator at the MCA Chicago, where she recently curated Carolina Caycedo solo exhibition From the Bottom of the River, which is the art Carolina's first major museum survey. And previously, Carla was the associate curator at the Ellie and Ethai Broad Art Museum at Michigan State University, where she organized solo exhibitions of new work by Johanna Unzueta, Claudia Peña Salinas, and Dwayne Linklater. She also organized Fiction as a Production, a major exhibition by Argentinian conceptual art pioneer David Lamelas, and also in 2015, she was awarded a Creative Capital Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writer Grant for an article on Cuban painter Celia Sanchez. And also we have with us today Taller California, and specifically Lorena Mostajo from Taller California. And Taller California is a small press and printing workshop located in the San Diego, Tijuana region. It publishes vibrant artist books that engage with the border as a social political place and as a liminal and creative space. It is committed to hybrid forms and multilingualism. Taller California's collaborative and experimental ethos creates new modes of production and distribution of printed matter and books. Lorena Mostajo is an editor and artist living between the US and Mexico. She is the editor along with Mara Fortes of Crisp Marker in Memoria, a volume of essays about the French filmmaker, and of the first translation into Spanish of Amos Vogel, Film as Subversive Art, both published in Mexico by Ambulante. Her writings about photography have appeared in the Mexican photography journal Luna Cornea. Taller California will be also participating as a first-time exhibitor in the upcoming online book fair by Print and Matter. So I prepared some questions for today, and I wanted to go straight into the questions. The first question that I wanted to start was with I'll read it to you. And as you guys answer, if you're, I think most of the bios had the pronouns, but just in case we missed it, if you can just say that so folks can refer to you correctly as you would like. So I'll begin with the question. Can each of you tell us how the political issues that you encounter in your personal everyday lives and larger social everyday lives relate to the work you do as an artist, curator, art critic, and printing press? And if there are any moments or projects that illustrate this relationship, can you please share those with us? Maybe, Caro, do you feel comfortable starting us off?
Yes, Carolina, she, her. And thank you everyone at Printed Matter and for my fellow panelists for being and sharing this time together. I think all of my works are kind of informed by my everyday and, you know, what surrounds me and what happens to me as a woman, as a mother, as a person of color in this country, as an immigrant with privileges in this country. I think from the first works, as soon as I graduated from art school in Colombia, like the work I did with Colectivo Cambalache, Museo de la Calle Street Museum, and then the evolution of that into the day-to-day project that lasted for a number of years that consisted in non-monetary exchange and bartering, you know, that responded to the precariousness you have as a cultural worker, as an artist, as a young practitioner, as somebody who just graduated, you know, who's trying to find their way and survive in that like precarious system. And all the way to the current ongoing project, Be Damned, that looks at the effects of dams and different extractive projects on waterways and ecosystems. That started because I read that the Magdalena River in Colombia was going to be dammed, and I lived on the borders of that river for a couple of years while I was a teenager, and my dad was cultivating cotton and rice in the middle body of the river, and so kind of it hit home, no, the fact that it was a river that, you know, was part of my kind of life history was being dammed, pulled me into investigating more about what was going on, and so most of my projects are informed by what happens to me, you know, like, for example, recently I did a series of collages that are based on, how do you call it? It's skipping my mind. On bonds, like utility bonds and debt bonds. And that responds to, you know, to the services that I have to pay. And, you know, and as a person who's a citizen who pays taxes, you know, who's interested in knowing where those taxes are going. So it's just doing a little bit of research and finding this bonds, you know, that are privatizing what is supposed to be our common goods, water, education, health, whatnot. So I would say that pretty much, you know, that immediate personal, you know, private life and personal everyday and the kind of consequent political surroundings informs my work.
So I hear that your work is a response to like being alive and being a part of this social political atmosphere. Thanks for sharing. Carla, would you mind going next?
Sure, thank you so much. And I want to thank Printed Matter for organizing this panel, our viewers that are joining us online, and also I'm very honored to share this space with these incredible women. Just like Carolina, I think that a lot of my work is really informed by my identity, my background, my personal experiences. I'm a Puerto Rican woman, you know, born and raised on the island with a lived experience here in the United States. I've been working in museums for the past 5 years almost in the United States. And I like to think of my work as a curator as being site responsive, meaning that I try to really research where I am, the history of the institution, but also the city where, you know, I'm making exhibitions. And I've been in Chicago for about a year and a half. Really, once I arrived here, I knew there was a very important and one of the largest Puerto Rican, you know, populations outside of the island here in Chicago. And I was interested in that history, but also just thinking about, you know, the larger Latinx population here in the city, which is about 30%. And 18% of those are Spanish speakers. And I'm a native Spanish speaker. And for me, it was very important to think about how to structure my work at the MCA in a way that my shows were, you know, accessible to these communities. And one of the questions that I asked myself and that I still ask myself is, how do I make these shows speak to those communities, and how can we bring those communities into the institution, which I think it's longer, term conversation, but one that's very important to me. And for me, it was very important to work with an artist such as Carolina and bring that voice to the institution. Her work has been an incredible inspiration for me. And one of the things that I think is very important that we have, done for the exhibition is really create a fully bilingual Spanish-English exhibition. All the gallery texts are in Spanish and English. The catalog is in Spanish and English, and even all the promotional materials, the social media outreach, the artist video. So, I'm very proud and happy to say that it's the first fully bilingual, holistically bilingual Spanish-English exhibition at the MCA. And that's all thanks to, Carolina and her work. And it's funny because it's really inspired by the structure of one of her pieces, which is the incredible video installation. Spaniards named her Magdalena, but natives call her Juma, which is in Spanish and English. So that was an opportunity for me to really take the structure of the work and translate it into the museum. And I just wanted to show briefly the publication because it's an incredible book that I hope all you have the opportunity to see, published with Delmonico. And it has these beautiful stills from apparitions and featuring Samed Guerra, one of the dancers and collaborators. And just wanted to show this quickly before I pass it on to another one of my colleagues.
I definitely feel you on the need for language justice and answering that necessity, like growing up in a household where people spoke Spanish only. And when we went to museums, how they didn't understand a lot of the work they were seeing. And then the second layer of not understanding was the tags on the wall. So if there was an explanation there that made the work more accessible, it was like completely lost. So I thank you for your effort in making art and exhibitions more accessible. Lorena, I would like to pose the question to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Thank you so much, Printed Matter, for organizing this, for the invitation. And I'm very honored to be with these, again, also wonderful women. And to answer, the question, being at the border is a very, living in between two countries is a very difficult way of navigating first identity, then place. And one of the things that I'm from Mexico City, and I've been living here for more than 6 years. And one of the things that is impossible to avoid being in San Diego and in Tijuana is obviously the border and what it does to the body, to your subjectivity, and also to language. And in the spaces where things are difficult, there are also spaces that are really fruitful and full of life. And recently I was talking to a friend who, he's the director of a gallery in San Isidro called The Front. They do excellent work with the community at the border. And we were talking about, I was telling him about the printing house, and he said, at the beginning I was organizing a lot of things, and at some point the theme of the border sometimes is so big in our lives, and then at some point you want to forget the border too. At some point you want to forget that you're constantly surveilled, that there is a transaction in between one language and the other, an identity in a country and another. And sometimes, people, for example, in Tijuana who cross to study, to work, they have already incorporated the crossing in their everyday lives. It's no longer an event. But there are moments, for example, when you're crossing, that you're reminded that there's a state that is surveilling you, that there's a land that's being divided, that there's someone who might not understand you, or someone who might mistake you for, if you're in a store and someone, usually that this is common where people, think that you work there because you look in a certain way. So there are a lot of negotiations in this place. So when I moved here, not only I was, part of these, but I also was fascinated in terms of language, and in terms of all the networks that are already in Tijuana, working with people in San Diego. So I found that that I needed to do something with all these energies in the and efforts of artists and community members. So the idea of the multilingual press came also because there are many indigenous languages spoken in the area. So hopefully in the future, the more people know about the publishing house, we will be able to publish in other languages, not only Spanish and English. And I think one of the things that I've learned from all the people who I've worked with is this, that the border it's a there's so many things to interpret about it. And it's a negotiation that is endless, but it's also rich. At the same time, one can rebel against the border while being subjected by it.
Yeah, I'm really interested in learning more about your border, the work you guys are doing as artists and organizers in the border. And perhaps actually this second question can help us understand that a little bit more. You've shared a lot already, but just different aspects of it. And that question is for you, Lorena, and for Carolina, but obviously if anybody has something else to add, please do. The question is, Carolina, your body of work, Be Dam, addresses water dams across the Americas. And Lorena, with Taller California, you have printed projects that address the US-Mexico border, including your most recent publication, Border Looping. For me, both of these physical barriers, the border wall and the dam, serve similar neoliberal interests and also have similar negative social environmental impacts on their surrounding communities. Can you share what some of these negative impacts are, especially those covered by your work? And also, can you share if you know of any artistic and political movements addressing these issues?
Absolutely the dam and the border share, a physical presence that cuts, a set of relationships in two, the body of a river in the case of the dam, and sometimes even physical barriers that traverse a river, cuts the body of a river in two, cuts the connections that communities have, and severe a set of cultural and biological relationships that happen within an ecosystem. In the case of a dam, one of the first consequences is the death of the fish that inhabit that river, because the dam stops reproductive cycles of fish swimming upstream, to reproduce. So that's one of the first impacts. And then, of course, that impacts all the rivering communities who have a fisher livelihood, like fisher folk, but also the stagnant reservoir normally fills very productive land where crops used to take place. So people dedicated to those crops also lose work sources, but also the access to good and healthy food. And then dams, though we have been fed a lot of lies in the sense that we have been taught that hydroelectricity is green energy, or that is a sustainable source of energy. There's nothing further than the truth, because actually large dams produce a tremendous amount of methane into the atmosphere, contributing to greenhouse gases. So these are kind of the immediate environmental impacts that you can see with any large dam or medium-sized dam construction. But then, there are many that you cannot see, like the emotional and psychological impacts that any extractive process, such as damming, mining, oil extraction, have over these communities. Because, when the river, that it's kind of your kin, it's part of your everyday. It's not only for a lot of communities, the river is not just this place for extraction, but it's something that you grow up with. It's part of your family almost. to have it dammed, to see it in that state, to see the water kind of dead, stagnant, is a tremendous psychological impact. Brings a lot of depression, and there's a sense that you get uprooted. Sometimes you're displaced by these mega constructions and mega projects, and you're displaced, you're uprooted totally, and your identity, your culture, your history suddenly is taken from you. So that is one of the impacts that I'm interested in to kind of make visible and highlight in the work, and also looking at as part of also that things that are lost and that are endangered when one of these extractivist processes come to your territory, to your land, is the loss of embodied knowledge, or the loss of the transmission of embodied knowledge. So say when I speak about embodied knowledge is that knowledge that we inherit from our grandparents and from our parents. In the case of fisherfolk, how to weave a net, how to cast a net to capture fish. And when there's no river left and there's no fish left in the river, then you stop casting the net, you stop weaving the net, and that embodied knowledge is not performed anymore. So that's something that worries me a lot, and that's something that I look at through different works, kind of the choreographies, there are these collective actions and performances that I facilitate and that we do in collaboration with communities who are resistant dams, or the Cosmota Raya series, which are these series made with artisanal fishing nets sourced from these same communities that speak about disembodied knowledge, the knowledge of weaving a net, the knowledge of casting the net, and also how performing or casting a net, how this reaffirms the river as a common good, right? So I would say, this is an example of two, series or two pieces that kind of talk about those losses and those things that worry me most about these extractive industries.
Lorena?
Yes, so I will talk a little bit about border looping, the book that we're going to present at the Printed Matter Fair, which is very, very exciting. And from there, I'm going to just respond to the question. So the border looping is a book. It's a dialogue between David Morrison Portillo and Rehan Ye. And what David does, which is very hard to describe, it's between a performance art and really punk activism. What he does is that he crosses the border non-stop. He chooses a day and crosses the border non-stop between Mexico and the United States, and he goes on and on and on for 4 or 5 hours. So in the looping, what happens is that first the massive violence of the state appears, but in crossing non-stop, the system starts to break down in a way. So for example, officers start to recognize him, and then first they're very violent with them, but then they start asking him like, oh, next time you cross, can you tell me a joke? And so there's something happening in this decision of crossing that is disarticulating the violence of the border. And again, he has the privilege to cross in that way because he's a U.S. citizen. But there's also in his thinking, he has said that he started doing this when soap at the border, the bathroom in the United States side was out. So he asked an officer to put soap in the bathroom. And that developed in a series of bureaucratic responses and aggressive responses. And this is why he started looping, to see if the authorities had put soap in the bathroom. So, and for example, he talks about the different answers that he gives to officers when they ask, what do you bring from Mexico? And he mentions a friend of his answers, mucha felicidad, a lot of happiness. So in these little gestures, he's subverting this relationship between officers and migrants. So in that sense, he's talking about body. I think the crossing is definitely about body. It creates it's a liminal space in which you're being surveilled, but you also have to account for yourself to someone else. And then also the border is the land divider that creates a lot of environmental issues along all these states. So for example, in San Diego, the Kumeyaay Nation is suing the Trump administration because they're constructing the wall in sacred lands. So they've been able to stop some of the construction, and it's still going on. They're still battling. In Texas, there's also 3 or 4 groups suing the government. And in terms of people who are, yes.
Finish.
Okay, in terms of the people who are working here at the border, there's with the damage to the bodies is Espacio Migrante, Border Angels, Pueblos Sin Fronteras. There's a really strong group of Central American youth who have migrated from Honduras, El Salvador to Tijuana, waiting to receive asylum here in the United States. They created a group called Contra Viento y Marea, and Debbie Machete is leading. It's part of that group. And then there are artists, another artist that I'm working with, her name is Ana Andrade. She's from Tijuana. And she photographed the people living at the bordo en el río that separates the US and Mexico. And she photographed the decline of nature, but also the way people lived and interacted in that space. And in a space that years later after she was there was completely redone by the government because they constructed a new port, a new garita. So they intubated, they paved the river. So now when you cross, you see all the pavement and all the vegetation, the birds that used to go there, they lost part of their habitat. So yeah, it is what the division of land does to the bodies, to the subjectivities, and to the environment is, it's really, really harsh, of course.
Caro?
Yes, I wanted to add that in Texas, I've been developing a work for the last 2 years there that's going to open at the Visual Arts Center in UT Austin in October. And we have been learning so much from the Carrizo Come Crudo tribe from Texas, who are just one of those groups who are resisting and suing the Trump government for their illegal and nasty construction of the wall, and also the private wall that was constructed in Texas, actually. Their arguments are, of course, environmental damage, because the wall, when it's constructed, it's just not the spikes that go up, but they actually erase almost a mile on each side of the wall. And, they kind of graze all the vegetation. So all the biodiversity that's, around that where the wall kind of goes is destructed. One of the most important cases is the National Butterfly Center. That's a small ecosystem in Hidalgo, Texas. But their other argument is that they're going over sacred land, and they're going over sacred cemeteries, ancestral cemeteries, but even kind of more contemporary ones that have veterans lying there and whatnot. And so yeah, there have been also Carrizo Come Crudo tribe of Texas, which of course is not federally recognized, but that they have been historically, their lands, which in their language is Somisek, the land of the sun, is on both sides of the borders, right? So Juan Mancias, who is the chairman of the Carrizo, always says, La frontera nos cruzó, the border crossed us, but we've always existed, and we've always walked and, lived along the Rio Grande. I think another group that I feel very inspired of the work on the border is Angry Tías and Abuelas, also in Texas.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much to both of you for all of that information. And it's interesting to hear from both of you, like some of the things you're talking about in languages and in like moments that I feel like there's a lot of the similar tactics used on the communities, whether it's a community of people or a community of plants. I mean, both of you guys talked about uprooting people, but also uprooting natural vegetation that is both its own thing and its own living thing, but it's also like food sources and things that feed people and so on. And on a brief note, a film that's coming to mind that I feel like actually ties dams and ties the border, and it's a sci-fi film, is Sleep Dealers. And it covers like a lot of the issues that you all are addressing, and also talks about like a future that could happen if we don't solve these issues. But we'll move on for now. And we'll go to the next question, which is for all of you guys. And I will read the question, and maybe for this question, we can begin with Carla. The question is, in my contemplation of the work that you all do, I came to realize that each of your projects that each of you have projects that politicize and platform the mundane acts of the everyday life, especially of those who reside in the social political margins. Carolina, for instance, your Cosmoatarrayas project primarily consists of artisanal fishing nets and directly references the everyday fishing that folks do in the rivers that your work revolves around. Lorena, with Taller California, the prints you co-produce with artist Adela Goldbar that portray a small artisanal brick-making community in Baja Mexico, and Carla, the essay that you wrote exploring the meaning, including the political meaning of trabajo, a photographic work of art by the late artist Catherine Matos Olivo, that portrayed her performing the different low-skilled jobs she had throughout her life. So I see this type of work as a powerful act that creates visibility and reverence for the mundane of the margins, while advancing its social political importance. But I also see this type of work as complicated acts that pose the opportunity for them and the ideas and those worlds and those people that they are referencing to get co-opted, fetishized, and reduced to mere objects or images by the art world that is deeply alienated from these spaces. My question to you guys is have you encountered this duality? How do you feel about it, and how do you navigate it? And Carla, if we could begin with you.
That's a tough question, but I think it's a very important question. And I think in the work that we do, at least for me as a curator, I need to live within the contradictions that this question implies. Because I think that, at the same time that I work with artists such as Carolina, who has very deep and profound social and political commitments, at the same time I work with these objects that are presented in a museum with the colonial history that implies, that are collected by private people, by private entities, and that can be perhaps sold at auction in the future. And we don't have really a lot of control over that. And I'm glad you mentioned the work of my friend, the artist Catherine Matos Olivo, because that really made me think of a completely different part of my career when I was working as an independent arts writer in San Juan. And that I think it's a very different type of work that from what I'm doing right now as a curator in a US museum. And Kathy's work really was about precarity, the fact that she had to take on 3 and 4 different jobs in order to make ends meet. And that's the reality of a lot of artists, in the United States, of course, but in Puerto Rico, the circumstances of the production and consumption of art is very different from the United States. And I think that it's important to acknowledge the distinction between these art worlds, right? And I think that what you're pointing to really is the arts industry or the art market that tends to reify the objects and commodify these works, and they get co-opted into, you know, a neoliberal ethos. So I think that it's important to make that distinction in the sense that that art world that we're always talking about is actually something very specific. It's like centered and focused in major cities in the US and Europe. And her work, really, Kathy's work, was presented mostly in nonprofit spaces, artist-run galleries. So the ecology of how art is produced, shown, and consumed is very different. Now, as a museum curator, and I'm like switching back to like what I do now, I think that that's a question that I pose myself all the time and that we should be thinking about all the time. And I think that we should acknowledge those contradictions and sort of navigate them in the way as ethically as we can, right? As curators, as cultural workers. And one thing that I have very present, or that I ask myself all the time when I'm working with an artist such as Carolina or any artist, is, you know, how do I honor and respect the work that I have been entrusted with? And how do I provide the proper context for this work to be presented in a museum? And how do the devices of display that we usually use as curators actually accelerate this consumption of objects that you are, you know, talking about? Because I think that part of the work that we do is really not only working with artists and the objects that they produce and bringing those relationships into the museum, but it's also about the interpretation, the context that we're providing for our visitors to come when they come and see the show. And when I'm talking about all these devices, and that's something that, you know, I think Carolina and I have discussed, it's like, what are those devices that standardize a way of looking at an object within a gallery? And that can mean anything from a pedestal to the production of walls, to the height of a piece, you know, to the hierarchy of the text, if it's a bilingual didactic text. So that's all these different things that I think about when I'm working with an artist. And that doesn't mean that that the processes that you're talking about won't happen, but I think that it's important to just acknowledge the fact that we are all necessarily enmeshed within these market forces, and that we need to navigate them as best as we can, and with the ethical commitments that, you know, we have as curators and as artists working in this field.
I really feel you in that, acknowledging the contradictions that one can have. And as an artist, like I feel like I'm coming more to that mind of thinking that I'm like, oh, I'm functioning in a very specific art world that in order to function with, you have to make space for these contradictions, or else I could go to a different art world, like the one that you said that Catherine is a part of, which are like, you know, there's the DIY or the more like activist art spaces that I know that are totally unrelated to the art world that we're talking about. So I appreciate that you're making those distinctions. Lorena, can we jump to you and then we'll end with Carolina?
Yes, so you mentioned Adela Goldbard's project, and that project, it's called Prototypo para un desastre arquitectónico. It's just, in English is so long, and so sorry that I'm just mentioning in Spanish. And what she did in this project is she went to Cerro Azul in Baja California. It's very close to Tecate in that area. And she worked with these brick makers to build a model of a house typical of lower class tenements. And so when we were discussing, you know, what kind of prints she wanted to produce for the show, we talk about basically the photographs of the process. And because in the process, you know, the contact with the brick makers, she was also, you know, doing the bricks herself. She would drive, come in and, you know, in between San Diego and Cerro Azul. And one of the things that that we printed was this house that usually the houses that are disposed in the US, all these prefabricated houses are sent to Tijuana. So she was really interested in these moving homes and moving a type of architecture to a space that had a different way of doing houses, of building houses. So in that sense, I think the projects that talk about these little aspects, that the labor that is kind of invisible, are things that are, I'm very interested to work with artists that are doing that. Another project that I think addresses this in a different way is a book that we'll also present at the fair, which is about surveillance in San Diego. So, and Lily Irani and Jesse Marks are, they're not only they describing the aspects of what goes behind surveillance and how we access information about how the government surveils us, but also they're writing a guide to learn how to access information or to request information from the government. So I think these aspects of these mundane things, the everyday things that they seem that might not be so interesting, the books that I'm publishing that address that in a way that they take that and then create something for the common good. So border looping will include a guide of how to border loop, and then this other book will have, how are you going to learn to access information, for example, in California, and yes. So I will stop there. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I would just, yes, I have just a quick answer about the way in which the art world, can eat also some communities sometimes in a toxic way. I think what working with artists in this mode of exchange, I have a model of trueque. So when artists print with me, I donate my labor and they donate material for other artists to print other books. So I've been able to support some groups in Mexico City who are responding to the pandemic. So in that way, everybody's helping each other. And I've been, with every author that I work with or artist, we have to set the rules of, what the money that comes from the books is going to another book that they want to make, or for another book of another person. So, it's also in the sense of book making and book selling. I'm also trying to not redefine, but like make our own rules together. So.
Oh, I'm muted. Something that, well, you said it, Lorena, but it also made me think of Carla's work about making common goods and resources for larger communities. And to an extent, I feel the Spanish print book that you're making and just thinking about language accessibility, that is like a common good resource. And I definitely would like to echo that. Caro, jumping to you.
Yes. Well, Carla mentioned it at one point when she was talking about my work, and I think she puts it lovely that, and that's something I work hard, is to maintain a commitment to the communities and to the processes that have informed my work and that have generously received me in their territories, that have educated me about their struggles, about, the ethics of collaboration, just thinking about how, those conversations, those critiques that come from precisely the people I collaborate with that are not part of this art industry are the ones that ground me and that, keep me, yeah, on my toes, I guess. And I just added in the chat for all the attendees, the Carrizo Come Crudo link, the Angry Tias and Abuelas, and the last one is the Facebook of Aguas por el Territorio, which is a youth organization from Colombia in Huila that are impacted by El Quimbo Dam. Was the first case study that informs that conforms the whole body of work of B Dam, that is the body of work that looks at the impacts of dams over rivers. And, the first time I visited there was 2013, started conversations with them in 2012. And the last interaction we're having is that I invited David Hernandez Palmar, who is a Waju indigenous two-spirit person who lives in the Jagua and who has collaborated to write a text for the catalog that we put together with Carla for the MCA. And he's certainly not, a voice that's coming from that art industry, though he is, an artist, a filmmaker, a journalist himself, and he curates film festivals and whatnot. But, I could certainly have gone through, to pick, I don't know, kind of anyone, right? Hey, high flight personality, or I don't know what, but, the fact that I wanted to go back and kind of, work on that commitment that I have to that community that has generously informed my work and has generously put everything for me there, as a way for me to kind of look back, talking about looping. I think that's an important act, to look back, to always look back and able to move forward. So, those long-term commitments take time, take effort, sometimes get rough, as any relationship. But you have to keep on grinding and have to keep on doing that. Today, I had a marvelous conversation precisely about the show I'm putting together for Oxy Arts that opens next month. And also, I got a super good grounding down from a few indigenous Chumash and Tongva women of like, hey, are you doing this? Are you doing this? Are you going to talk about this? But have you done this? Have you done this? So it's about finding those ways to communicate and weave together those two spaces. No, like I think I like to say that I've gotten better, and that my process of learning how to weave those two spaces has is getting better and better by the day. But it's definitely a commitment and hard work.
Yeah. Carolina, and because I feel like I'm so familiar with your work because I was your former artist assistant. So I know your work and your path very well. And I think one thing that I appreciate about your work and that I've learned from your work and I've learned from things that my organizing peers have told me is like making that space to give people for people from the community or people that I'm working or writing about or making films with and about, to make space for them to tell me like, how does this, like, you may be talking about the problematics of like organic foods, but like some people may not even have access to organic food or food at all. Like, how do you talk about those problematics with this new context? And if I don't make the space for people to speak to me, because a lot of artists unfortunately don't always make this space, I can fall into these like traps of thinking that I know everything. But I think I'm going to jump to a question that I had just for you here, since it's kind of related and I think it might flow better. And I rather end with a question for all rather than this one. But a question is that I had for you is like, do you have any words of advice for artists who are trying to work with political groups or social justice issues? Specifically, you've done a lot of work with Rios Vivos, who is working in response to the dam that was built in Colombia. So yeah, do you have any tips how artists can go about that? And if there's any specific things that you've learned in your process of working?
Yeah, it's never bad to repeat, but the commitment, that effort of committing to an idea and to a relationship, right? And feeding that relationship. It's like a marriage, if you don't fuel the fire, it's not going to happen. I don't know, but it's that, and doing it also in your capacity. So learning to pace yourself, because working with communities can be draining too, and maybe you have like an aesthetic goal and you think, oh, I need to do this project in a year, but maybe that's not in the agenda of the community and they have other things to prioritize. So learning also to respect the agendas in place for communities and organizations and see how you can support those agendas instead of the community supporting your work as an artist. How you, with your set of skills, you know, I always say that as artists, our set of skills is to construct images, but also to deconstruct those images, you know, and to distribute resources that you receive from precisely that art industry. You know, when you get a commission or a production grant, how can you distribute those resources in the community, and how can you support with your skills as an artist the agendas in place for that community, either by highlighting, you know, their efforts or their struggles through film, through collages, through bookmaking, through printmaking, through curating, through putting a series of, you know, exhibitions or screenings together, but also respecting the time. You know, the art world functions at such a speed, that's, you know, as any industry has a certain speed that we've all seen, you know, with a pandemic, we've all have been able to take a breath, you know, but it seems that it's kind of speeding up again. So, and respect the time and the, you know, the time cycles of those communities. And, you know, and also we are artists. I mean, there are certainly people in the front lines who are activists. I don't consider myself to be in the front line. People in the front lines across the Americas and even here in the United States, you know, get legally hassled, are followed, are killed, you know, in some extreme cases. But we can be immediately, you know, behind that front line, supporting with our work, with our visuals, with monetary, you know, distribution, with gathering resources, with sharing and highlighting their voices. So there's many ways that we can collaborate. Some are more visible, some are more invisible, but it's certainly something that it's like a long-term commitment. If you want to work with a community or with a social organization, be prepared to commit to long-term and pace yourself. And I think that's the best way to approach it. Yeah, because these battles are long-term battles. And
yeah, the relationship is key, like you said. And I totally feel you on so many other things, and many of the things that you're mentioning actually reminded me of like the Zapatista principles, which I think actually are great principles to implement in any collaboration and relationship we have across art and across life. And also a great book, Decolonizing Methodologies by Linda Tuhiwai Smith. That's been really helpful to me also. I'm gonna move on to the a question for Lorena and Carla. And let me make sure I'm reading the correct question. Okay, here we go. So the question is, as a press that prints artist books and media, and as a curator or art critic, one per se is not given the same opportunity to directly work with communities in political struggle like an artist is granted the same, like an artist has. Nonetheless, in an abstract way, one is always working with community. For example, perhaps a curator curates a show that is informed by a justice movement or needs of a community. I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts around this, and if you can tell us about any of the ways you are either working indirectly with community, or if there's a direct way you're actually doing it also, like that would, and either or, that would be awesome to hear about. Maybe Carla, if you can.
Sure. So I really don't consider myself like a socially engaged curator, and I'm not an activist by any means. And my commitments are really working collaboratively with artists to make exhibitions with the objects that they make and with the relationships that they bring into the institution. That said, I think that I try to translate those commitments to the ways in which I work in the institution. And I think that Carolina's exhibition at the MCA is a really great example. The way that she establishes relationships with communities, the ways that she structures the work itself has provided me with a blueprint to bring the work into the institution. So the structure of the exhibition is really inspired by the ways in which Carolina works. And I think that that informs not only my working relationships with my colleagues, but also, you know, how the show looks like and the publication and the types of, you know, contributors that we invite. And Carolina mentioned David Hernandez Palmar, who's a fantastic YU filmmaker. And I just wanted to add a comment that his text adds something so significant to the publication, because the lived experience of a geochoreography is not translatable to a gallery space or to a museum. So the emotional and affective response that he wrote in his text, a very emotional, very personal text, says so much about the reciprocal relationships that Carolina builds on the ground. And that's a word that David uses a lot, reciprocity. And it's about reciprocal relationships. So for me, it's like, how can I learn from that? And how can I work in that reciprocity ethos within, you know, the museum? And I just wanted to mention, and apart from that, that on the horizon, I'm working right now in researching the artistic genealogies between Chicago and Puerto Rico and the history of social justice movements here that were initiated by the Puerto Rican community, and their intersectional work with the Chicanx organizers. So in the horizon of my continued tenure at DMCA, I'm thinking about how to, you know, do a project that is really thinking of these histories together. And I'm, you know, researching local organizations that have been doing a lot of work on the ground already. So I'm not coming in and saying, okay, I just moved to Chicago and I'm doing this show, but really incorporating into the show already existing knowledge and that exists, you know, that is in the city. And so I'm not like really starting from scratch. I'm just bolstering that, that organizing the archival material and just bringing it into the MCA. So I think that those are two kind of examples of how that kind of like community structure can translate into the work that I do.
I'm excited to see that show. And if folks want to keep track of that, how can they do so?
Well, it's not public yet. It's just like a research project. So it'll be down the pipeline in a few years. It's
at MCA, you said, right?
At the MCA.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Lorena?
Yes. First, Carolina, I think your words of advice were beautiful. Like, I'm so happy that we're talking right now. Yes. So I think that, you know, as a printing press, I think that the act of publishing is the act of making something public. So in that sense, there is already a sense of, there is a community that you're already addressing, and or that you're imagining, and the power of that is, it can be really strong if you connect also to the people who are around you, if you serve that community. So it could be, you know, this community of readers can be, you know, like very global or just local. And I think in that sense, what I'm figuring out with Taller California is how to cross, you know, not only between the readers in Mexico, Estados Unidos, but also how to, that the people who are going to engage with these artists, with the books, are going to create networks also, you know, in their own, in their imagination. So for example, the readers of Border Looping, they'll have a connection with David and Rehan. The readers of the surveillance book, they will have a guide. So that already is doing something for the community. So I see publishing as this beautiful act of, through language and images, create a network, you know, create a space of silence and meditation where people can talk in a different way and can show in a different way. So
I definitely feel you on that. And it's like a network across physical space and then also across time. There's so many texts that were written before my time and ideas that I'm just like, this is everything. So I'm going to move on to the last question, which is for all of you guys. And this question is, what are the pressing social and environmental issues within the art world that we need to address? And whomever wants to start can go for it. If somebody's like, I got it. Maybe I'll choose somebody. I'll choose Carolina.
I think that we have a big carbon footprint as artists and as art institutions. And that's a big challenge because, shipping, crating, insurances, flying all over the globe to all these biennials and art fairs. That's something that worries me and that I'm certainly part of. It's one of these contradictions that we talked about. And so, the pandemic, for example, has made me ask myself, now that I'm home in the Sereno in East LA, if I'm the artist of my block, what is my role in my block? I don't have the answer yet. But certainly, looking at those practices like Museo de la Calle, or those practices that I was doing when I was still in art school, where I was intervening streets in Bogota, where I grew up, being very informed about the dynamics of the street culture in Bogota too. So which are very different from here, from LA and from El Sereno. But try to think about that. But definitely the carbon footprint and all these flying and how to address this in the art world is something that's a big challenge for us, for our community of artists and cultural makers. And I think also and then, at large, just the environmental collapse. I mean, the pandemic has definitely brought to attention the deep inequalities that exist in our society, and have even made them worse in terms of racial injustice, in terms of access to health, to housing, to food, and how dependent we are of like an electric grid we don't control at all. I was here during the pandemic, really, peeing myself, like, what if the light and the electricity fails and there's no internet at all? Like, what the hell are we going to do? We don't control anything. So just thinking a lot about just energy transition and fair energy transition, and how we really, I don't know what we have to do as a society. I mean, but we really have to start moving aggressively in that direction of energy transition, and thinking about energy production that's localized and controlled by communities, as small as blocks, as small as a few streets, Yeah.
I just wanted to add, because when I read your question, Gloria, I immediately thought about the Blockbuster show and the carbon footprint of a large international, or a survey with international aspirations, even a biennial, but also in museums. And does it make sense right now to bring artwork from around the world to a place where it's going to be up in a museum for 2 or 3 months, and then it's going to be shipped back to the four corners of the world? I'm not sure. So that's something that I've been, thinking a lot about, and just thinking as a curator who works in a museum, what does it mean to look at our surroundings more closely? And that's not to say that we're not going to do a survey, or we're not going to do a show that's thinking, from this international perspective, but what can we do to really minimize that carbon footprint and just be more cognizant of how these loans are affecting the environment? I think it's very important. The other thing I wanted to add, and this is like a large kind of question that everybody's thinking about, especially now during the pandemic and with the social uprisings that have been happening for the past year is like, how can we build a more equitable museum, and how does that look like? I don't have the answer to that. This is an ongoing question, but I think it's something that we need to be asking ourselves every single day. And it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, especially because there's a lot of conversation around diversity, inclusion, and representation, but I really feel that that's not enough. And that those are terms that we have inherited from the multicultural era that have a certain limit. So how can we reformulate that to exceed and push that conversation forward? And I think that for us who, museum workers, we need to be not only including artists that have been historically excluded or not represented in the canon, we need to bring artists that challenge the canon, that challenge these master narratives, and that really disrupt the foundations of everything that the museum is built on, even if it's ruffling some feathers, and even if it takes, a lot of work to make those projects happen. But I think that it's something that we all need to be thinking about, the terms of the conversation. Are these terms sufficient? I'm not so sure. I'm satisfied with this idea of inclusion. So that's something that it's an ongoing thinking that I'm trying to work through also with my colleagues at the NCA.
And I would just add, because I echo everything that Carolina and Carla have mentioned already, is that I think to understand that our world is a small space that we inhabit from time to time, but the larger picture is it looks very dreary. It's like it's not good what's coming. So for example, to understand the relationship between us and nature, to reconfigure our idea of what nature is, and also how this system pushes bodies and landscapes and ecosystems, environments. I think the pressing matter is to reimagine that, that we cannot have a utopia that doesn't include our relationship with nature. We really need to replace ourselves, not as we cannot put technology as the savior of everything, the opposite. It's time to, I think the work of the imagination, it's so necessary right now. So I would say that to me, that is the challenge in all the worlds that we inhabit.
Briefly, I wanted to echo or I guess like add a comment to what you said, Carla, too, that the reimagining or reconsidering the role of the museum or the art gallery or the arts nonprofit, that has something that has been really interesting to me, especially because I'm from LA, Carolina is from LA, and LA, I feel like there's mixed feelings towards museums about how people feel about museums. Some people like want them out. They don't necessarily see them as spaces that are friendly. And to me, I feel like caught in the middle a lot of times. And when I think about that, I think about like the places that I know that people are down to protect and will be there. And it's like a place that comes to mind is Chuco's Justice Center. And this is a place that does community organizing. And when I think about like, why do people want this place so much, is because like when Chuco's was inviting people to organize, they're like, people are like, I can't organize because I need a job, or I can't organize because I need to finish my high school diploma, or I have a baby. And Chuco started really shaping and developing their place to like meet people's needs and not seem so like distant, right? And I'm really inspired by that format. And I'm like, how can we make museums like crucial to people, right? Like, and not erasing the art and the importance of art and imagination, because that's at the center, but I guess like kind of like healing the alienation that has happened because of capitalism and its role within you know, funded art spaces and stuff like that. But yeah, so
I wanted to add.
Not only, oh yeah.
Go for it.
I just wanted to add something that's really kind of continuing your train of thought, Gloria, because I think sometimes museums look at other museums and sometimes even larger museums. And I'm of the opinion that they need to look at other types of institutions and other types of organizations. Like they should be looking at, I don't know, smaller, maybe arts related organizations in the Caribbean, like Alice Yard in Trinidad or Beta Local in Puerto Rico. You know, how do these organizations sit within their local communities, and how do they build relationships? And I think that, yeah, sometimes like, I don't think we need to look at other museums. Like we have so much to learn from other smaller organizations. And I think that's something that we should be thinking about for sure. Go ahead, Caro.
No. I was just going to hammer everyone in the head with, you know, not only capitalist structures within the museum, but also patriarchal and white supremacist structures within the museum.
So much we can talk about around these topics, and I'm excited and grateful that we got the opportunity to share space, and I've learned a lot. I think this is about the moment where we open it up for at least 10 minutes or so to the public for questions. I'm looking towards our chat, and perhaps there's no questions, or maybe there is some questions. In the meantime, if folks have any like afterthoughts that you would like to add or anything, I know you guys mentioned a couple of projects that are coming up, but anything that you think people should have on their radar, or
there is one question in the Q&A.
Oh, really? That's bizarre. I'm not receiving those. So do you mind reading it? Because I don't see it in my chat.
Yeah, it just came in.
Oh, it just came in.
Yeah, it's a question for Carolina and everyone else too. I'm thinking a lot about how you talked about dams earlier and the emotional effects of that kind of disruption and loss. I was recently in the Olympic Peninsula and went to the river where the Elwha Dam used to exist. It's the Elwha River, a recent and largest dam removal project in the US history and the world. Thanks to pressure from the Lower Clallam tribe and other local tribes, and in just a few years without this dam, there is now a healthy growing population of salmon that has totally changed the ecology and the biome. In a time where ecological devastation feels so irreparable, seeing how quickly things change after the dam removal was really profound. I wonder if you witnessed things like this, how quickly the environment can bounce back, and how you might take inspiration from these rare moments. I've been there at the Elwha, at the mouth of the Elwha. It's really amazing and inspiring to be there and to hear the elders of the Lower Clallam tribe, how they organized and spearheaded the removal of those dams. And yes, I think nature has a capacity to bounce back, but they need our help. I mean, it needs our help, you know, that all the rivers, the mountains, they need us there to support that bouncing back. And, you know, when I spoke about fair energy transition in the last answer, a just transition is not only about thinking and imagining other ways of producing electricity, but it also has to do with removing and decommissioning and dismantling oppressive infrastructure, such as dams, such as oil rigs, such as border walls, such as aging infrastructure that is not doing anything for us, or that is just like a threat to us. And, you know, I think about the Hidroituango Dam in Colombia that's been in red alert and about to collapse for the last 3 years. I think about all the mine-tailing dams in Minas Gerais in Brazil that keep collapsing and killing 300 people at a time and producing toxic waves of mine detritus that kills a whole river at a time. So we need to work towards it. What I take of these inspiration, you know, is that we need to identify those oppressive infrastructures and work towards that dismantling. And that is part of this just energy transition that we need to gear towards. Yes.
I think I don't see another question in the chat unless you all do, because I seem to have a bit of a delay. Just if you, oh, here it goes.
Another question.
What roles do you think art have in order to help us navigate future cultural and technological transformations?
Well, I think Lorena said it beautifully, you know, the role of imagination. I think the role of weaving together different worlds too. Sometimes the political sphere and like we're living that right now in the United States, and not only the United States, but you know, everywhere. There's such a seems like a division that seems that cannot be, you know, that gap that seems that it's impossible to kind of close between people thinking one thing and people thinking the other thing and acting in one way and acting in another way. But I found that, you know, that art has the possibility of actually at least creating a platform where these people that have different ideologies and different perspectives of life can meet and at least start a conversation. Yeah.
Anybody else who wants to add to that?
Just, you know, to follow what Carolina said, that, you know, there, when that question is posed, a question that disrupts or like asks the viewer to enter into a different space, that's already even though it's a minor act of being in another situation yourself, I think that's already could be very powerful and very moving for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think just briefly for that, Art on My Mind by Bell Hooks, there's a portion that she dedicates to that, like the role of art and how it's like a refuge that we can come to make sense of the world. And although in that making sense, it complicates the world because the world is a complicated place, but through that complication, like clarity of who we are, where we stand comes about. But I really enjoy how they go into that. A follow-up question to that is, if you all have final thoughts, then, oh, no, that's just different. That's like an internal thing. There's one more. Can you discuss or share information about the photography project along the border around the issues of water resources?
I think she's referring to Ana Andrade's book. The book will hopefully be ready for the beginning of spring, and it is her 4 or 5 year project of photographing the people living in at the border in Tijuana. So it will be published by it's a collaboration between Ana Andrade and Taller California. So if you want to know more about it, we'll be posting in our kind of very modest social networks information about it. And the website is tallercalifornia.org, and not Taller California, but Taller California. So yeah.
And Lorena, you will be presenting in the virtual book fair, right?
Yes, we'll be there. So everybody who's part of the fair, where everybody's so excited that, you know, although we cannot be in person, I am so thankful that Printed Matter is doing this, because I'm a fan of the fair and all the relations and information and people that you meet at the fair. So in a way, they're doing their best, so all of us can communicate and learn, find books that obviously will, really interesting books that will be there.
And Carolina, you have a book that folks can get through Printed Matter. That's the book that you collaborated on with Carla, right?
Yes, I understand it's available through Printed Matter, and it's a monograph called From the Bottom of the River, Desde el Fondo del Río. Está bilingüe en español y en inglés. It's bilingual. It has text from Carla herself, from Pilar Tompkins Rivers, who's a curator based here in LA, and from David Hernandez Palmar, who is a YU filmmaker based in Colombia.
Great. And on an ending note, I would like to encourage folks to seek you all out, your books, your tables, and everything going on. And thank you all for sharing space. And thank you, Sonel, for facilitating this space.
I want to thank each of you. You've given us so much to think about, a really thoughtful and powerful conversation on so many levels. We're really honored to have been able to host this conversation. Thank you to each of you for your work, incredible work, and for sharing it with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to all the attendees. I see you.